Welcome to the Mancast, episode 5, White Privilege, the Patriarchy, and Other Modern Mythologies. So we are going to start with white privilege today, which is obviously a modern mythology. It does not exist, but privilege does exist. We'll get into that. And we'll let Chad lead us in with his first thoughts on this subject.
Well, like Ed, I was a little late to the session, to the recording today, because I was looking for my monocle and my three-piece suit with the tails, my top hat, and my cane, because all white people have a Monopoly Man outfit in the closet somewhere.
I don't know. I don't know when they make the delivery in Pennsylvania. I haven't lived there in a few years now, but I still get my. So it is the second Saturday of every month that I get my white privilege package filled with money and insider trading.
Well, like I said, just like every black person has a bass guitar in their basement, every white person has a Monopoly Man outfit in their closet. But mine must be, the maid must have took mine to the laundry today. It must be getting pressed because I couldn't find it. So here I'm wearing my regular getup.
So obviously, I mean, you and I are so overcompensated for our whiteness. It's amazing. We only do this for sport because we don't have to work ever. Because see, back in the 1960s when I was born, if you were born white, you got a giant box of privilege, and you could only use it if you use that box of privilege to hold other people down.
Yeah, whenever I get off work, a lot of days, and I'm like shaped like my name, like the letter C, like my body's curved like that, I feel so privileged. My freaking it's sore all day and all night, and then go back to the grind the next day and go bust more concrete and go demolish more freaking construction sites. And I mean, I'm just freaking raking in that privilege, bro.
Yes, of course you are. Of course you are. Nobody has been more privileged than me. And I'm not even going to get into that because it's a story of magnitudes that you cannot deny my superiority of privilege. So
yeah. I remember.
I'm going to let that one just rest where it's at because that is not a subject we're getting into today.
A little heavier than what we're talking about.
Oh, right. Well, see, that's because everybody's got their own story to tell. And I think interestingly about privilege is last week we led into something where we were talking about minorities and the way that the Constitution is actually built and set up for all of us is that we are all the smallest of all minorities. We're the minority of one. There is, however, in this country, a massive class of privileged people, but has absolutely nothing at all to do with their skin color. The privilege that they have is money and power. That money and power gives them privilege everywhere they go throughout this entire world. If you think in your mind that, say, Shaquille O'Neal is less privileged than Aaron Rodgers, they're both wildly, fantastically gifted athletes who have earned gazillions of dollars. Aaron Rodgers earns no more right or gets treated any differently than Shaquille O'Neal does wherever he goes. We actually can make the argument, because Shaquille's personality is 1,000 times better, that Shaquille is more loved. And it's got nothing to do with their skin color. The reason that these men are in the positions they are and they have the wealth and the power that comes with that wealth that they do is because they are transitory athletes that change the outscape of their sports and change everything in that sport permanently because of their greatness. It had nothing to do with the color of their skin. White privilege is an absolute myth. And I think it's a great way for the ruling class, which are the real privileged, to keep the rest of us pointing fingers at each other and infighting. They're the ones making all the money. They're the ones with all the power. And we're the ones who are arguing about whether we have privilege or not. It's nonsense.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite comedians, Theo Von. And he's talking about, growing up poor. And he's like, I remember being poor growing up. You knew a couple guys that owned sweaters, but me, I was like a 2 tank tops in the winter guy,
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, some of the black kids in the neighborhood be like, yo, you white people did this to us. And I'd be like, you mean you think I did all this to you so that I could just move in next door and live the same life? It's like,
right.
I don't think that was me.
Well, The reality in this country is, and this would probably shock most people, to find out that there are more people that would be called white that are at or below the poverty level than there are actually Black people who live in this country. Now, the numbers are very, very similar, so we'll call it even. But it's when you have desperately poor people in this country, whether they're white, Black, Hispanic, or any other color, green, I don't care. And we have the amount of largesse that we do, we can give $120 billion to the Ukraine to fight against a country. Here's the thing most people don't know. The entire military budget for Russia for a whole year is $90 billion for the whole country. And we give the Ukraine $120 billion when their entire military budget is around $15 billion. We've literally given them almost 10 times the amount of money they would normally have, and they're asking for more because they've already run out of stuff. That's privilege. When you can go and you can give countries to war and kill people more, but let your own people starve, have to deal with things that happened in East Palestine. Bet most people don't know what happened in Eastern Kentucky just recently, right? We have enough money to save everybody in this country, give everybody good health care, and make sure nobody is at a poverty level as designed as you can make it, because somebody's at the lowest rung no matter what. So I guess you'd start somewhere. But we can improve everybody's life here in this country pretty easily with the amount of money that we waste. And nobody seems to be screaming about that. The Democrats in particular in this, who were never this way until the last, I don't know, we'll call it since Trump. Now all of a sudden, warmongering and stealing money out of the mouths of people who need it the most seems to be their MO.
Well, that's very true. And you know, you bring up a good point about sort of the demographics and how that shakes out. Turns out that the absolute poorest county in the entire country is in Kentucky, and it's not like it's in Louisville, like in the hood. It's in the freaking rural area out in the freaking Appalachian Mountains, and it is grinding poverty. I mean, this is people making like average 20,000 a year. You know, it's the highest level of addiction, the highest level of incarceration. It's the highest levels of, you know, obesity, of heart disease, of, I mean, you name it, and unemployment, of lack of education. You know, Harlem, Chicago, Baltimore, none of these places are anywhere near this. And so to act like just because you have white skin, you automatically have some kind of privilege flies in the face of all of the facts and all of the reality. And honestly, it's an epithet. It is a slur. What you are saying is incredibly racist. I take offense to it. I'm not on behalf of just myself, because I've lived through hardship too, and I've fought to make it to where I am, and have to work my ass off every day to keep it. But on behalf of these people who live like this, who haven't been given any help, who, you know, the government would shit on them or lock them up or poison them or kill them just as fast as they would any Black person. And yet you're supposed to look at them. You're supposed to, yeah, clearly they've been abandoned, and you're supposed to look at them with disdain as if they've been born with some sort of extra privilege because of their skin color when they live this way. Kiss my ass. I'm sorry. I don't want to be vitriolic. And I feel like we got a little salty last time, so I'm going to lighten up a little bit. But this gets so frustrating to me, because you know who runs on about white privilege? It's a bunch of wealthy, white, suburbanite kids who have nothing better to do but to go get degrees in sociology and gender studies, and then they're the ones that bitch and moan about white privilege. And it's like, well, okay, Cupcake, look in the mirror. You've never had to do anything with your life. Yeah, you're privileged, but that doesn't mean everybody else who's white is.
Yeah, it's like the kid at Stanford University arguing with somebody like Ben Shapiro about how white privilege does this or does that, and Ben Shapiro's gone, wait a minute. You're going to Stanford University, one of the top 5 universities in this country, And how are you actually here? Oh, your dad's paying for it. You want to talk to us about white privilege all over again? You want to start your sentence all over again because somehow you're not privileged here? Are you insane? And that's the whole point. What we're doing is we're just simply taking a narrative that has been formulated by a political action parties so that they can get things that they want. They don't care who they step on or harm or hurt along the way. That much is obvious. In Eastern Kentucky, just not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, they had a massive flood that destroyed an entire town, left them all with less than they had. And it is one of the poorest parts of this country. They were averaging, like you were saying just a few minutes ago, about 20 grand a year. So these people have nothing. These people don't even really ask for handouts. They're not accepting welfare, for generally speaking. They don't have health care. They can barely even feed their families. Where is the government? I'm sure state of Kentucky, because Rand Paul's there, and I'm sure that he's doing what he can. But the federal government and all of the mainstream media, whether they're on the left or the right, are not even mentioning this as if it never happened. And that's what goes on. Now, I wouldn't suggest I want to be poor anywhere, but at least if you're poor in the inner city, they have a harder time looking away from you than if you're in rural America. There are a lot of desperately poor people in the Appalachians, the Ridge Mountains of the Tennessee, down in the Mississippi Delta, all the way through West Virginia and the Appalachians there, into the Kentuckys, Arkansas. We have a lot of poor areas in this country, and we are just handing away tens of hundreds of billions of dollars to wage war for no particular other reason than the military-industrial complex making our politicians wealthy, because they're the ones with the privilege. Meanwhile, Bob down the street and Jed down the street are arguing with each other because one's black and one's white, who's privileged and who's not. You guys are lower middle class. Neither fucking one of you are privileged. Hello?
Yeah, the irony there is those guys probably aren't arguing. Those guys are probably having a beer together and talking about how shitty the whole system is fucking them both.
Okay,
and about how there is absolutely privilege, but that it isn't based on skin color, right?
You're right. Okay, so what I would say is I'll step that back. The media wants you to believe that Bob and Jed are having that conversation and yelling at each other and hating each other and calling each other Rachel Epitaphs. But you're correct. They're in each other's backyard having a barbecue right now, dropping back a couple of beers and laughing at Biden and his administration and any other politician they can think of.
Absolutely. That's how that works. And you know it because you live in the South and you see it every day.
Every day. This is another thing too. Some of the places that scream the loudest about privilege are the ones that have the highest population of white people to begin with. Is there any places more privileged than the New England states in this country with money, with power? And if you go into the New England states, you'll find out that New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont and Maine are actually 1 and 2, the whitest by population states in this country. Number 1 and number 2. They're both over 96% white, right?
I heard that's where the Dilbert guy is leaving to head to, is Vermont.
Right. And that's also where our buddy Bernie Sanders is from, who's constantly trying to get everybody to be a socialist, right? Mm-hmm. He's the most privileged of privilege. And yet he's telling me that I'm privileged simply based because I have no control over the color of the skin tone of my skin any more than anybody else does. It's a non sequitur and it's a non-starter to me. It's bullshit. And the idea that the media keeps harping and driving this home, trying to get everybody to believe it, is insanity. If you want to talk about minorities in this country, this is one thing you won't. White guys in this country don't run around saying that they're a minority. But if you look at the numbers, if everybody truly is a minority, black people are a minority, Asian people are a minority, Hispanics are a minority, women are a minority. If you add all those people up, white men are the only minority because they make up the vast majority of people. You don't hear people, you don't hear the white guys running around screaming that somehow they're being held down or that they're not getting a fair shake. And by the way, white men are the only people in this country, whether people like to hear the truth or not and the facts of it, there isn't a single law on the books that is geared to give a white guy any privilege at all, period. Do you know, and most people don't, there are over 500 laws on the books to give women and minority a leg up over white men. So who has privilege and exactly?
Yeah, we can talk about that. And one of our favorite scholars and writers, Thomas Sowell, has covered that really well. Affirmative action, things of this nature, and how it's racist, and it definitely is like a regression to make policy based on skin color, but it's actually been a detriment too. It hasn't even helped anyone really. And it kind of turns the whole argument on its head about equality. So that's the biggest problem. But without getting too far into that, I kind of want to go back to about why these policies were made, why affirmative action was created. Let's acknowledge the history, and let's acknowledge the past. There have been horrific atrocities committed in America, all over the world, really.
All over the world. Based
on race, based on anything you can come up with. But race has been a big one. It's been a real easy thing to divide people on because it's physical and you can see it. You can right away, you can other that person.
Right.
And so they've done that all along throughout history, long before any Europeans were settling in the United States. Slavery dates far back beyond that. Obviously, African slaves were enslaving each other before Whitey got there. Indians were enslaving each other before Whitey got there. People were enslaving each other. It's just a nasty part of humanity, unfortunately, right? Race-based slavery was
no race in the history of this world has ever been spared slavery. Not a single one.
And race-based slavery was an obvious manifestation of slavery because it's so easy to go, well, those people who look like that, they're all the slaves. So that's just keeps it really simple, right? Really freaking easy.
And generally speaking, though, throughout world history,
it isn't extra evil. It isn't extra evil. It's still just evil.
Right. But there is no extra to evil. Evil's evil.
That's my point, though. But it's a race crime. It's a hate crime. So it's extra murder.
So the way slavery has always worked, regardless of color, it's never really a color thing. When one country takes over another, when Rome went in and took over a country, they turned those people into slaves, right? Because they weren't Roman. And that's just the way it is. The Ottomans did it. The Kush did it. They all do it. And so that's just the nature of human, at least up until this time frame, is that conquering nations take over and then enslave the people that they conquer. That's just the way that it worked out. Now, that doesn't justify it, obviously. But it wasn't really based on race. It was based more about, we beat your ass, now you're slaves.
So, but here's the thing, like when they started, right before they actually did race-based chattel slavery in the U.S., it was mixed. I mean, it didn't matter if you were white, black, whatever. You could be indentured servant just like the rest. And it was all just indentured servitude until they decided to try this race-based thing that was obvious. Like I said, it was an obvious manifestation. It isn't the first time it's ever been done in history. And it's just something that takes place. But if slavery is rife, well, race-based slavery is bound to happen if there's a mixed bag of people. So it was a natural progression, unfortunately. But here's my thing. You had whites and blacks working in those fields together before that. And they didn't stop. Even when they finally made black, and I guess the most sinister thing about this was that they made you, if you were black, it made automatically your offspring were slaves, right? And so you're just born right into it, whereas it wasn't the same for whites. So that was an obvious distinction, and that was where this departure took place.
Well,
but you had abolitionists all along, right? Like I've done genealogy, and I'm pretty sure my family's related to John Brown. Well, where was his white privilege when he tried to free the slaves at Harper's Ferry and they hanged his ass, right? You know, there was all kinds of people. Lysander Spooner, who my son's middle name is after, who represented slaves who were runaway. He represented them pro bono in court anytime he could because, he felt it was the right thing to do. And what was he? He was ruined. The government completely destroyed him in any way they could. Anytime he started any kind of endeavor, they would bury it because he was not towing the line. Where was his privilege? Where are all these people? Where was all the privilege of all of the Union soldiers who spilled their blood out there, right? Where was all that? That's what I'm saying. So it's just like to go right back though to what you were saying before. All of this is to keep Bob and Jim divided. It's to keep us from fighting together against the true enemy, the common enemy, which is the government themselves.
Right. And that's the point that I wanted to try to stick to through this conversation is that the government, there is privilege. The privilege in this country is the extreme wealthy and the politically connected. They're the only ones that have the kind of privilege that people think privilege actually gives you. If you're connected politically, let's say you're president of the United States, and your son is a ne'er-do-well junkie who has broken gun laws, should be in prison for that at a bare minimum, gets rid of his gun and throws it into a dumpster at a high school. That's another 5 years for that one. Lied on his application, another 5 years for that. We all know what's on his laptop now. I'm not going to get into it. It's pointless. But and then, of course, all the trading in his daddy's favors and everything else. And what happens to him or anybody like him is, well, nothing. That's privilege. When you can go right in front of a camera, lie as much as you feel like it, and be stealing, ripping off, running scams, selling favors, selling out your own country, selling out your own children, doing whatever you need to do, whatever you want to do, and then go like this to the American people and say, stop me if you can, because they know you can't. And there's Biden family is their atrocities against America are enumerated. It is so easy to spell it out and so easy to see if you wish to see it. If any politician right now, along with Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and a laundry list of all these guys, Graham, all of them deserve to be in prison for the rest of their lives. None of them will ever be charged. None of them.
Well, we should spend a whole podcast on that. I mean, but just to drill down on your point a little bit further and then to step back into something we were talking about before. I just heard Nancy Pelosi's daughter, a clip of her on The View, talking about how George W. Bush was a father figure to her. So this is supposed to be the most liberal Democrat woman in the country, her daughter, which is apparently ascribes to the same ideals, right?
And the second most hated president in American history, right?
And then you have this horrific right-wing conservative, killing babies in Iraq and, forcing Christianity down our throats, all that. But him and Michelle Obama are like literally hold hands, like they're almost about to screw. It looks like every time you see them in public. It's like this weird, sick thing. Anyway, all right. Before we get too far off the field, I do want to say about privilege and what we were talking about. 100% there is privilege. It lies in class privilege. Super wealthy have power and influence, and so they have privilege. If Correct. You don't have power and influence, you are a gnat. It doesn't matter what color gnat you are, you will be squashed. There is, however, one thing, again, going back to the ugly history of our racial past. Man, I've done a lot of study on this stuff too, especially like during Reconstruction era. What took place in Jim Crow South was some pretty heinous shit.
Oh yeah,
it's been rough, right? We know that there's been horrific things done based on race, again, all over the world, but just as heinous stuff, Emmett Till, stuff like that that's happened in the United States is just, it's sickening, right? But that, you can't let all that characterize somebody else just because they have the same skin color as the person that perpetrated that. I mean, that's just the same as me thinking anybody who looks like a Muslim must be, Osama bin Laden's right-hand man.
Right.
It's BS, dude. Right. So that alone is important to note. But I like to go back to one thing I've said to you a lot, Ed. While I don't believe in white privilege, I do believe in minority disadvantage. And I'll explain that. What minority disadvantage is if you are in the minority population of a group, of a government, of a country, you are, by virtue of democracy and by virtue of the size of your group, you're going to get the short end of the stick on some things. That's how democracy works. You ever see the people like Black Lives Matter and the people who walking through the streets chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." Well, yeah, guess what? Democracy means majority rule. That means the minority groups get fucked. So if you're such a big person for democracy and you really want to protect democracy, well, guess what? That's how that works. Minorities get roasted. So if you are somebody who wants a more direct democracy, a more of a socialist democracy, democratic socialism, you're talking about more mob rule. You were literally asking for more majority over minority rule. That's what you're asking for. And so when you go away from libertarian ideas of protecting individuals, again, the smallest minority on the planet is the individual. When you go against that and you look through only racial lenses or only gender lenses, any of these lenses that are simply meant to divide us, then you're being used as a useful idiot. You're a tool. And the only reason all these big corporations are speaking your woke language is to placate you. That way they don't. Those corporations you used to hate, but then they put a little rainbow on there and they hire somebody who says they're not cisgendered. And the next thing you know, you let them continue to do the horrific shit they've always done, selling poison to Americans and using slave labor overseas. But suddenly they're on your woke agenda campaign, so you let them pass. Well, that doesn't make any sense as you use, your slave labor cobalt batteries and you wear your freaking, your fancy shoes that were probably made by freaking Thai kids. So, there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around.
Your Apple or your Apple or Android phone that they build suicide nets around the tops of the building because people are trying to fling themselves off because they don't want to. They're going insane from doing the work because they work them to death and basically it's in servitude. It's not. They're enslaved. They're not free people. It goes on in China all the time. So you make a good point in regards to the minority. Every country on earth, whoever the ruling class is generally the majority. That's usually the way that works. And that ruling class usually make sure that they prioritize themselves first. That's the way it's been through history, right? So if you happen to be in a minority, then you're always going to get the shitty end of the stick. That is very true. However, in America, at least you have a voice that can be heard. You may not get what you want. You may never be able to get the votes to get what you want, but at least you can get sympathy and help garner or help to cultivate more votes and try to move something forward or ahead. There is no form of socialism on earth where that is ever allowed to occur. Period. End of sentence. If you start to make too much waves and you are a minority and a socialist country, you will be quashed like a bug and they'll never look back or care about you. They didn't kill over 100 million people in the 20th century because they're nice guys.
That's a valid point. So another thing I'd like to talk about when it comes to white privilege is, or the lack thereof is, another perfect contrast, an example of this is the difference between one very real disaster that affected people terribly in East Palestine they're still being raked over the coals. We're now completely confirming that they've been poisoned all along. Yep. Water has been completely contaminated. These people are screwed. Their houses are worth 100%. Nothing. Like, they're completely screwed. And nobody's given them crap. Nobody's been there to help them. But over a weekend, you can bail out SVB, right? You can bail out the wealthy people with millions of dollars on a weekend. Like the weekend doesn't even get over. By Monday morning, boom, rescued, bailout, everything
Got
you
those
need.
bankers
Don't
taken care
worry
of,
about it.
Chad.
We're not even going to look at what the number is. We're gonna guarantee you guys don't sweat it.
Yeah.
And then the people in East Palestine are like, yo, could somebody answer the phone?
Right.
You know?
SVB Bank, the thing about the SVB Bank, and one of the dirty little secrets that nobody is actually talking about, is most of that is investment money. These are high earner accounts. So the FDIC covers up to $250,000. Do you know they don't have a single account, not one, that is below $250,000? These people are the wealthiest of the wealthiest, and they like to invest their money and they pull things together. Not going to get into the economics of how that all plays out, but at the end of the day, they were all bailed out because they are all wealthy. They are all privileged, and the politicians who they bankroll bailed them out instantaneously. See how fast it happened to get them bailed out? But the people in East Palestine, they got to eat shit. So tell me all about their white privilege again, because I'd love to hear it.
Well, and that's just it too. Like all of the people at SVB they're big time Democrat donors. Mm-hmm. So they've given tons of money to this regime, and the people in East Palestine are probably conservatives, and so they haven't given a dick. But it isn't even really that. They could all be the hardcore Democrats, and in Chicago or something, and it wouldn't matter because they're poor and they're insignificant.
Well, but it wasn't that it was.
I wasn't disagreeing with you.
Political. It's just that when you are connected and you have privilege, you can have a bank go totally bust, and if you got 100 million in that bank, you're getting your money back.
One thing I will say about just full disclosure on like the SVB thing, and I heard Peter Thiel talking about this, and so like $250,000 limit is kind of ludicrous for a business bank. You could have a small business with 15 employees, and you may have a payroll of a couple $1 million, depending on what you're doing, and accounts receivable and stock, all kinds of stuff, right? You may need to have millions of dollars in a bank. And there was a school in somewhere in New England. All their money is in that bank. And if they don't have that money, they don't get to pay their teachers, their janitors, anybody. And so it is a very real situation that 250 they need to change that law. If it's a business bank, they need to have a higher number on that insurance and just have the banks pay more money into the pool for the insurance.
Well, the 250,000 is only for individual accounts. It does not apply to business accounts. Business accounts can be insured on their own, but a lot of these guys did not insure the amount of money that they had in there and then need the federal government to bail them out.
But the FDIC thing happens automatically for everyone. And what it should be is just business banks have a higher threshold for their insurance. So it should just be an automatic thing, the same way as FDIC is for individual depositors. But the point is that it's not that simple to go, well, we only guarantee $250,000. Sorry about your luck. Because what needs to happen.
But then what we're saying is that people who are brilliantly smart at business and have tens or hundreds of millions, if not more money in a bank, and have a lot to say about how that bank does things and how they invest and how they take care of their money, get to be completely whole because somebody at the bank completely screwed up. If they invested with an investment group and that happened, they want to get shit back.
Well, but that's different. And I don't think the investors should get shit back. But the depositors who literally stuck their money in there, I think they should be made whole. And I think that what should happen is
by the government?
By the bank, however, whatever that requires. However, here's the thing. The problem is we don't go after the people who do this. We don't ever take the executives, and clean them out and then disperse their money evenly. We always let them walk away with their parachutes, which they did. They all took their money out.
Well, sure,
they took their money out together.
Of course,
or did they try to crash it themselves? I don't know, but either way, they all got paid. That needs to all be taken back.
Oh no, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing at all. And look, there are business wise, there are going to be business is always going to be a risk. Messing around the bank itself, that the people who are in charge of that bank should all have been arrested They should all have been charged with crimes, and every one of their assets should have been taken away from them. Period. End of sentence. There's no two ways. There's no two ways about that. But my problem here is that a lot of these businesses already had their money insured themselves in case there was a calamity, but they get to get their money back from their insurance company and the government. This seems a little ridiculous. I don't want the government bailing banks out. If you
I don't think they get the double dip, but my point is that's fine. Don't bail them out. My point is change the law so they have to insure that money on a higher scale.
I agree with that.
They only force them to insure it up to $250 right now, and that's pointless.
But I'm not sure I want the government. See, this is the problem that we had with the last bailouts. We gave banks trillions of dollars because of their mistakes. And then the people at the top of that list did not suffer not one little bit. And they've all made over 300% back since. And the little guy hasn't. And they were involved in those banks too. So to me, if you're going to have banks handling your money, then the bank itself has to hold the insurance themselves to handle everything that should be in that bank. The banks always seem to be able to do whatever they want, get away with whatever they want, always get bailed out by the insurance companies or by the federal government or both. And they're never held to account for anything that they do. The banks themselves should have massive insurance policies to cover the money that's in them. And if that costs them a hell of a lot of money, their depositors should help carry that load, especially at a bank that's basically an investment bank for big players. Now, there may have been a couple of here and there, and they're being well compensated for anyway. But that's just part of the whole thing. So the federal government shouldn't be coming into private business and bailing anybody out at any time.
Did you just say that the rich bankers have privilege?
I did say that because they do.
That's what you said. Yeah. Shocker.
I know, right? Yeah. Because this is about, you know what? Probably only because they're white.
Well, some of them are Asian, so I don't know where they're getting
there's that.
They must be borrowing privilege from some white person.
So all joking aside, the privilege part of all of this is that privilege makes sure that the privileged get 100% taken care of. And here we have people, as you started to, when we went into this, in this conversation, was that what is happening in East Palestine? Nobody cares about those people. We're finding out more and more. We did poison them. We're now admitting that we poisoned them. They're really not going to do anything about it. And here we are very quickly throwing $90 billion at a bank that totally ate shit because of poor management at the very top. And those people don't have to give up a single dollar.
True story, man. Yeah, I think they might have had a female. Let me look at that. Who was on the board of SVB? Oh yeah, Laura, Kim. I mean, I know that I'm gendering them based on their names. Shucks. But there are
the way you play, Chad.
Michelle. There are several women on that board, Ed. Which brings me to our next topic. How can that be? How can there be these powerful, privileged women bankers on the board of this big bank, this big multi-billion-dollar bank? If they're women, how is that possible when we live in a patriarchy?
That's right. Because clearly these women are innocent. It's not their fault. That's all I got. We cannot, Chad, we cannot hold people to account for their bad choices unless, of course, they're white men. Then we can hold you to account. Unless you're privileged at the very top of the scale. Now we can't hold them to account either. From where I'm standing, the only people that get held to account about anything is everybody in the middle class down. We get held to account for everything that we do, and oftentimes for everything that we don't do.
Yeah. I was just looking at some of the stats, and it's pretty shocking how the fastest growing demographic for Fortune 500 company CEOs is, of course, women.
Of course. And
Um,
I'm sure they're qualified as they need to be, which is
well,
not
yeah.
qualified at all, generally speaking. But that's what happens when we are now promoting people and giving people putting them in positions that they clearly can't handle, based solely on how woke they are. For instance, Pete Buttigieg. No one in the history of secretaries of any department in the history of the United States has been less qualified than that turd. Period. End of sentence. That guy is garbage. And the fact that he still has his job is shocking to me. And the only reason he has it is because he's gay. Now, Lacringe Pierre, Jean Pierre Lacringe, or whatever her name is, she is the first Black LGBTQ or XYZ to be the press secretary. She is wildly unqualified to do her job, wildly unqualified. And she gets to continue to do it anyway. Then, of course, we had Sam Britton, another guy who got his job because he had a beard, a bald head, wore lipstick in a dress and high heels, and had a fetish for stealing women's clothes. And he had no science degree whatsoever and head up our nuclear department because that makes perfect sense.
Hey, man, you got
So
to get your
there's
ladies'
lots of
clothes somewhere.
privilege. There's lots of privilege, but it's not white. It's woke, or it's connected, or it's wealth, or it's power in politics. There's plenty of privilege to go around, but don't go throwing race colors at the front of it because that's just nonsense. That's lazy, is what it is. It's because you're not intellectually smart enough to understand or engage in an argument about what's really going on. So you just, like sheep, you go bah and follow everyone and just point fingers like you're, from the invasion of the body snatchers, where everybody points with their mouth hanging wide open because they see one that's not one of them. That's the way they treat it. If you're not intellectually able to engage in a real conversation about the real problems in this country, then, as my favorite comedian Dave Chappelle once said, you could do this. It's very controversial. You could shut the fuck up.
I will say that, putting on some makeup and donning a woman's dress as a man, yeah, that's pretty hot. But there's one way to make it hotter. That's if that dress is stolen.
That's right. If it's stolen from an airport in particular. And then he got caught. It took them. He had to literally get caught on camera and detained 3 times until they forced him to resign. They didn't even fire him. He resigned. So this is what's going on now. Is there? They talk about diversity because of our apparent white privilege has made our country incapable of running without them making sure that woke culture is embedded everywhere. The problem with that is anytime that we try to force these kinds of changes on society, is that oftentimes people who are completely unqualified get the job. And I don't want the unqualified people to get the job. Nobody cares whether you're gay, whether you're lesbian, whether you're pink, blue, orange, black, brown, white. It doesn't matter. If my child needs help, I don't care what you look like or who you screw or what you're doing on your own personal time. I don't care. Can you save my kid or me or my loved ones or our country or whatever the case may be? But if you think for 1 second that I care at all who you are personally, who you screw, who you're hanging out with, what part of society you think you're less privileged because you're from, I don't care. And nobody does. By the way, except for the elitists in the large cities in this country, literally no one in this country gives a shit about stuff like that. The people in East Palestine don't care who Pete Buttigieg is having sex with. All they care about is, can you help us? And, well, the answer is clearly no. He can't because he doesn't know how to do his job.
Well, back to the patriarchy again, though. Like, Just like we did with race, you acknowledge the past.
Sure.
There's a history of chauvinism, sexism, men sort of running things. Um, I
Men are
saw this
still running
commercial.
things.
I saw this commercial the other day, and well, we've essentially stepped aside in a lot of capacities and funneled women into these positions. And again, I care less about that than I do what I'll get to. But just to preface it is to say, look, I mean, I know there's a history of it. I know there was a time and a place in this country not all that long ago when bosses could slap their secretaries on the ass and there really wasn't a thing they could do about it. That's demeaning, it's disgusting. And if you treat a woman like that, and it was like my wife or my sister or my mother, I'm pretty sure I'm coming to kick your ass. Anyway, doesn't matter if it was 1940 or it's now. But
Agreed.
but at the same time, we've made strides. That isn't something that is
Also
allowed
have to
anymore.
recognize too, while that was 1946 or now, it was an extreme minority of people in those positions that were taking advantage of them in that way. Harvey Weinstein is an outlier with the bullshit that he did compared to other executives that were in Hollywood at the time. You can't say they're all doing it or the vast majority of them are doing it because one's doing it. Was
Yeah,
it more
Matt
prevalent?
Lauer.
Was it more prevalent? Sure. But was it at a level, the way that the media and the government makes it look today is that every single man who had a position of power did that. And that's obviously totally bullshit.
It's completely false. And guys, men have been looking out for women forever.
Mm-hmm.
And just because some men will predate on women doesn't mean the majority of men won't find that predation vehemently disgusting and put a stop to it.
Correct.
Because I can tell you this much, even as being a jock back in high school and being pretty unruly and pretty wild and crazy, me and my friends, if we caught you trying to go in and sleep with some drunk girl who was passing out in a bedroom, and we saw you slipping in there to do what we knew you were going to do, you get your ass beat. You know what I mean?
I agree with that.
But that's what I'm saying. Well, guess what? That is kind of a patriarchal thing because men, it's almost like we're supposed to take care of the weaker part of the species. Yes, women, you are weaker, physically weaker, emotionally weaker. There is a difference between men and women biologically, and it's a good thing. You should embrace it instead of pretending like it doesn't
Absolutely.
exist. I had a conversation about this with a colleague one time when I was in my PhD program, and she was a feminist. And she basically said that, all the gender roles and the gender differences are just societal constructs. And I'm like, well, that's laughable. And I think that the studies have shown that that's not true. Just look at the primates. And she's like, well, some primates have matriarchal structures. I'm like, okay, sure. The bonobos, there are some, but most gorillas and stuff like that, it's very much a patriarchy in that the women take care of the offspring and the men put the hammer down when the hammer needs to be put down. And whenever the hierarchy is upset, it's because some younger male challenged the alpha male, knocked him down, and now he's the alpha. Now he's the king dick in the whole thing. And so that's how it's always been structured. And I'm like, you believe in evolution, right? And of course she does. I'm like, well, then if that's our closest relative, and that's how they've been structured forever, what makes you think that we're so different? And that we created, did we tell them to do it that way too? Because I don't think we did. So anyway, she was kind of like speechless at that point. And I'm not like trying to dog on her or anything like that. It's just what people have been told is that this is a societal construct. It's no, our gender differences, and while it's fluid to a point, like there's a scale, there are some effeminate men, there are some very masculine women. I understand there's a spectrum there, but if you look at the bell curve and you look at where the averages lie, there's a stunning difference between men and women in several ways, and it isn't bad. It's the yin and the yang, for crying out loud.
And I'll take what you're saying. Even men, good men, generally. All the good men that I know, and I celebrate being a man, by the way, and I'm damn proud to be one. I got no issues with it, and I'm never going to apologize for it. I can promise you that. But good men look out for anything that's weaker than them. If I see another man kick his dog, I'm going to knock him on his ass too, because that animal is weaker and it's frail by comparison and it needs protected. So if you're going to be a bully, no matter what, you're going to hear from me if I see it. If you're being horrible to children, if you're taking advantage of a man because he's either weaker than you or he's in terms somehow in a wheelchair or whatever, and you're taking advantage of that, I'll knock you on your ass for that too. Good men take care of the people around them because they have the ability to do it. That's the point. That's what I don't get. I'm not opening a door for a woman because I think she's beneath me. I'm opening a door for a woman because it's the right thing, nice thing to do. What the hell is wrong with that? I don't get that. Right? Your women cannot, no matter how much they wish they could, they cannot beat a man in a physical confrontation. Now, are there extreme outliers? Yeah. If you take a regular, go to your job every day, don't work out marshmallow man who's 50 pounds overweight, and you're going to throw him in the ring or in a street fight with Ronda Rousey, he's going to eat shit probably. But generally speaking, Ronda Rousey gets into it with any man who is in good shape, takes care of himself, and has any fighting skills whatsoever. He will fucking destroy her. Just no chance against him. And the idea, Hollywood, for instance, makes that all seem like a woman could be a CIA agent and beat up 20 guys. No, sorry. She's no more likely to do that than the male CIA agent is too. You have to suspend reality sometimes, right? As much as I like Bruce Lee in his movies, Bruce Lee couldn't beat up 100 dudes at a time. Sorry, not going to happen. I don't care who you are. Superior numbers always win, right? So this idea, we have convinced an entire now 2 generations of children that are now young adults, that somehow they are physically and mentally and emotionally equal with each other. That is simply not true at all. And this is maybe a talk for another time, but men under the age of 30 have already bowed out of the whole thing. They're not even interested any longer in dating or getting married or anything because there's no upside for them.
Well, you know what? The repercussions of that have already been seen. The way that pendulum has swung. So because all the young men are like, screw this whole dating thing. Like, it's pointless. It's toxic. I'm just asking for trouble. I'm asking to be used. I'm asking to be abused. So screw it. I'm counting myself out. Well, now because of that, women are becoming different. Young women are changing. Young women are becoming more conservative. One of the top most highly trending things on TikTok right now are these, gosh, what was the terms? They made a term for it, but it's like a trad wife, they call it, traditional wife. And it's these young women who are newly married,
I call them the anti-feminists.
Baking videos. Well, yeah, they're making baking videos and cleaning the house and raising the kids and talking about how rewarding it is. And it's like, oh, here we go. That's the clap back, because that's naturally what happened when the guys are like, piss on it then. I ain't dealing with you feminists. You know what I mean? Well, naturally, now if you want a man, you better not be looking like that.
Well, and we're gonna do a show that's going to be a little more dedicated to that whole thing. But all these things work together. You know, when we're saying that, you know, men have privilege, or the white men in particular have privilege, it's not true. And we can't even, as a society, if our society was to be viewed as a car, it is rusted out. It's been in a bad accident. Transmission doesn't work. Motor barely runs. It needs tires. And we need to start fixing this car, because it's the only way we can make our society run, is to get it up and running. But instead, what we're doing is we're destroying the car more and more and more. Everybody wants to blame somebody else. The tires want to blame the transmission. The transmission wants to blame the engine, and so on and so forth. And the way that real privilege in this country works is that they convince the rest of us that we're the problem with each other. That my problem should be with women, or should be with Black people, or should be with people that are Hispanic, or should be with Asian people, or all of those people. I myself, throughout my lifetime, particularly over the last, say, 10 years, have been called everything in the book: a chauvinist, a misogynist, a racist, a homophobic, you name it, I've been called it. None of it is true. None of these people even know me. They just make up their minds simply because I don't agree with them. All you have to do is look at the hierarchy in this country right now, which right now, the primary power is with the Democrats still in Washington. These people are infighting and eating themselves. A Democrat can't stand to be in a room with a Democrat who does not 100% agree with everything they say. That's what we've come down to at this point. If we agree on 99% of everything, we still can't be friends because you don't agree with this one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's especially toxic on the left, but it's unfortunate that the right is so ineffectual as well at this point that, I think
Ed's in
a similar boat. I've vowed to never take part in federal elections ever again. And it's because, speaking of privilege, I don't feel privileged because I don't feel represented. Right or left, Republican, Democrat, there is zero opportunity for me to be represented in the way that things currently work. Zero.
Okay, so quick. Name the last politician who did what they said they were going to do when they were running their campaign. Exactly. That's who it is. No fucking one. And that's a problem, right? But the bigger problem along with all of that is you literally have no chance of getting, say, Nancy Pelosi out of her district until she decides to retire, because they gerrymandered her district to be 85, 90% Democrat, and nobody can run against her. So how could she possibly lose? Now I'm using Nancy Pelosi as an example. Gerrymandering goes on everywhere. Every state. If the Republicans take over from the Democrats, they get to redistrict and vice versa. And it is such a shit show. All of it is garbage and a lie. You have, slow down. If you vote, unless you're voting for your local mayor or your local school board, if you're voting on the federal level, your vote means nothing. You're wasting your time.
Yeah, the only
there has not been a president in my lifetime that has ever done anything they said they were going to do.
The only vote that counts on the federal level, it comes in denominations of about a couple $100,000 each. Maybe up north of that, millions usually. Yep. Those are votes that count. But your little ballot vote isn't shit. You got to vote with your pocketbook, and it's got to be a big one.
I mean, look at Washington. I mean, we started this with privilege, and these are the most privileged of them all. Our country isn't even run by the politicians that you people are voting for. They're run by bureaucrats and lobbyists, for God's sake. That's who's running our country. Big tobacco, big oil, pharmacies, well, big pharma. They're running this country. And now, of course, to get the narrative that the politicians, to do the bidding of the people who put them in power, the banks and big pharma and big oil and all this other apparatus, now they have big tech in their back pocket to tell you what's true and what's not true based on, well, who's ever in power. Why anybody would vote for that system, for the life of me, I can't understand. That's privilege. That's power. Anybody who's listening to us, I promise you, except for the NSA who's probably listening right now, I promise you that the people who have privilege are not who the media says they are. There is no such thing as white privilege. If you are black, brown, white, or Asian, doesn't matter. If you are an elected official and you have real money, then you have real privilege and power. Outside of that, it does not exist. And to pretend that it does. And oh, by the way, because I know the argument's on the other side, remember that all the people who tell you that they're going to break this chain of events are the same people that you keep voting into power, who do absolutely nothing about the chain of events that put us where we are to begin with. So why you would think that they're gonna correct their own mistakes makes me scratch my head and go, really? You put this person back in power for the 30th consecutive year because they're going to fix all the shit that they never fixed to begin with? Good luck with that.
Yeah, tell Julian Assange where he can find that white privilege. I'm sure he would like to get some white privilege to get him out of solitary confinement.
The greatest whistleblower in American history, right?
Yeah, I'm sure Edward Snowden would like to get some. I'm sure Snowden would like to get some white privilege and come home.
Right.
I'm sure that crazy, just nutty kid who was wearing the buffalo hat or whatever, the Viking hat, on January 6th. I'm sure he'd like to get a hold of some white privilege right now.
Sure, I bet he would.
Doing years in prison for being led into a public building.
Or the Rittenhouse kid, right? Where's his white privilege?
Oh, I mean, at least the system somewhat ended up working for him. At least he's one case of like the outcome actually being right. And I'm like, oh wow, the system actually worked correctly.
It did for him.
They let the evidence shake out and people were able to see it and go, oh, well, this guy's innocent. And then he got to go out there and sue all the pieces of crap networks who tried to bury him, and he cleaned up on that deal too.
He did clean up, but along with that comes the fact that this young man who wanted to go to college, wanted to go to university, he can't. No university will allow him to sign up for classes or even be on campus. They tried at Arizona, and he didn't even last a month because he was so heckled and treated like such shit. And this is a young man who's innocent of everything they claimed he was guilty of. And here's another thing too. This really bothers me. He is better off. This really bothers me about a lot that went down with him is that these guys that were involved with this, they were all career criminals. One of them was a pedophile. For God's sakes. And they treated that man like he was some kind of hero for trying to get the gun away from him. He screwed children as a way of life and went to prison for it multiple times.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's who we were supposed to have sympathy for? What the hell is happening in this country where we're supposed to have sympathy for a pedophile, for God's sake?
But Trump, Ed, that Kyle Rittenhouse kid was a Trump guy. So
he was a Trumper, man.
That's even worse than fucking kids. That's worse than screwing kids.
I've never voted for Donald Trump. And here's the thing. I've been called a Trumpist myself on almost any internet discussion board that I go on to. The second that you, right or left, that you veer off the reservation, the way that they interpret that reservation, you're either a Stalinist or a Trumpist, right? There's no in between. There's no gray areas anymore. You either agree 100% with everything that I think, or you are the enemy, period, end of sentence. And you can see that happening in our inner politics in Washington right now. AOC literally hates half of the Democrats that are currently in Washington, and they hate her back because they disagree on one or two things. How are we supposed to get the left and the right to have a middle ground when their own parties are warring with each other because no one will agree with anybody 100%? It's an absurdity. This is what kindergarten children should be doing, not full-grown adults who are trying to make decisions for 332 million people.
Amen, bro. So, well, on that, man, we have an hour in the bag. Would you like
man, that was a fast hour, too.
Didn't that fly? I know, because that was just, I mean, like we had to do any prep for that one.
No, I didn't even look anything up. I know this one inside now.
Just spit that one right out.
I've lived for over 50 years now at white privilege, so I know a few things about it.
About it, man. So, all right, yeah. So I guess I'll make one final statement. I'll let you wrap it up then, and just to kind of recap, there is minority disadvantage. There is obviously racism. Black folks have gotten completely shafted historically in this country. And I don't think that just because we changed laws and that that those are historical pasts, that the repercussions are not still unfolding. I know that, a lot to do with mass incarceration and all the high crime in these neighborhoods and so forth, is some of it is the legacy of racism that still exists. But there's a whole other shitload of factors involved in that bag that you'd have to unpack and acknowledge if you were going to have an actual truth for conversation. And if you're actually just trying to narrow it all down and trying to put all the plight of poor Black people based solely on racism, well, you're just a fool. You're either a fool or you're a liar. And either way, you should go get yourself educated, because there's a lot of other issues within those communities, even the rural Kentucky white communities, that hold those people back. And it isn't their skin color, and it isn't their lack of skin color or their lack of privilege. But I could go into it. I'd love to go into that. Let's talk about the causes of poverty and so forth for another podcast. But the point is, skin-based privilege doesn't exist in this country. If it ever did, it doesn't anymore. And the patriarchy is not a thing anymore, unless females, you keep pushing and you keep opening the door to let men and women's spaces. We'll take over all those too, because eventually we'll just keep being top women in Time magazine. We'll break all the women's records in all the women's sports, and we'll keep being better at being women than you. So stop it with that nonsense. All right, Ed.
All right. To me, I'll sum this up and I'll do it very simply. Anybody who's sitting around making excuses for where they are in their life, if they put that energy to improving their life, things would probably be a whole lot better for them. I don't mean to sound, like your dad, pull up by your bootstraps. I know some people are at a disadvantage. Nobody's going to argue that. But here's the problem. There will never be a time in world history, not now, not before us, and not moving ahead, even if we go a million years, where human beings are going to be on an equal and level playing field. That's not how it works, and it's never going to work. And you'll learn that when you're very, very young. If you go out and you're 8 years old and you play your friend on a basketball court in a friendly game and he beats you, that makes him better at that moment. Period. That's life. And if you're not willing to embrace life and understand that there's going to be wins and losses and tragedy and amazing things happening to you, that sometimes there's going to be structures inside of the apparatus that are going to hold you down, regardless of your skin color or your gender, then you're an idiot, because life is not fair. Get over yourself. You don't deserve something special. This is what all this white privilege shit that you're talking all the time is. What you're saying is you deserve something special because you're not white. Well, what's the difference between those two things then? Absolutely nothing. If you want life to be fair, move to Alaska, buy 1,000 acres, and never talk to another human again for the rest of your life. And then you will be the most equality-driven person on planet Earth, because no one will ever have anything over you. But I'd rather lose from time to time and have to get better at something because somebody else is actually my better. And that's life, and I'm okay with that.
All right. Well, on that, this has been the Tortured Man podcast. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, for sticking around this long. Next week, we'll probably do a little bit more lighthearted. Obviously, there will be some serious stuff, too, but I think we might bring in a good friend of the show, Jeff Slavin, as a surprise.
Oh,
yeah. Our favorite horticulturist to tell us about the GMOs and all of the corruption involved in major farming. So look forward to that.
Jeff can tell you how your healthy diet isn't actually helping you.
You're being poisoned, folks. So with that, please do tune in next week for that. Thank you for everybody who's been subscribing lately. Our subscriber list is growing like crazy for us anyway. So that's really exciting. Yeah. We're starting to get some engagement in the comments. So please, by all means, if you haven't subbed yet, do so. Leave us a comment. We love to engage and get the chat going. So thank you all so much for watching.
Be on the forefront of the next big thing in podcast, and that's us.
That's right, folks. We will see you next week.
Peace out.